So at this point, the application here is almost done, but there are some improvements I want to make to the code to follow all the common best practices and to also explore some other crucial Angular features you should know about. And I'll actually start with such a feature. If we take a look at a user, we can see that the task I'm outputting here actually has no rounded corners and also no drop shadow behind it, which is not necessarily a huge problem, but which is a look I'd like to have. Now, of course, we could simply add it to the CSS styling here of that task. But actually here in this application, I already got that exact style that I'd like to replicate here in another component, in the user component. There it's on this div, which wraps this button, where I have this border radius, this drop shadow, and I make sure that the content inside of it doesn't break out of this box. Now, of course, we could simply set this up as a general, globally available CSS class and start assigning that to our elements in the different component templates. But there also is an alternative using an Angular feature which you will need from time to time. And therefore here, instead of just solving this with CSS, I'll create a new component. Again, with the Angular CLI, and I'll store this component in a shared folder, which doesn't exist yet in my app folder. And I'll name the component card. Now I chose shared here because this is now not a component that belongs to a specific feature area of this application. It doesn't belong to the users or the tasks. Instead, it's a UI component that could be used anywhere in the application. So we could also name the folder UI, but I will go for shared. I don't need tests, so I will add skip tests. And with that, a new component file and folder is created, that card component here. Now in this card component template, I want to have a div, and then we'll soon add something inside of that div. And I want to style that div with those styles I showed you on the user component. So these styles here, I'll cut them from the user component CSS file and instead add them here in the card component CSS file. Now with that, this div here will receive these styles. And now my idea is to use this card component, this custom card component here, as a wrapper around my user button here. So instead of that div. And I could then also use it as a wrapper in the task component around that article, so that I get the same structure and styling in all the places where I use this component as a wrapper. So let's give this a try. Let's go to the user component and replace this div with app-card. And the closing tag goes down there. So now we don't have a self-closing component, but instead a component with content between its tags. Now, as always, we must add it to the imports in order to be available. So I'll quickly do that so that the user component knows about that card component. And now if we save everything, the users are gone and I instead see those dots, which I set up as a placeholder in that newly added card component template. These dots here. And this is a super important behavior to understand and be aware of. When you use an Angular component somewhere in your application, like here as a wrapper around some other markup, it will by default not keep that markup around which you wrap it. Instead, it will replace this wrapped markup with its own template markup. So with the markup defined in the card component template here. Now, it's not uncommon though that you might want to combine the markup of this card component in this case and the markup of the wrapped component. And this is done by adding another special element in the template of the wrapping component, so of the card component here. And that would be the ng-content element. This is an element that's not built into the browser, but instead, as you can also tell by this prefix, ng, is coming from Angular. And it essentially acts as a placeholder for the wrapped markup. So for the markup that's wrapped by this component that has this template. So ng-content will be replaced with the markup that's being wrapped by the card component, so by this markup. And that's how you can then merge these different markups together. Because of course you can use ng-content wherever you want to use it here. And you could have a way more complex structure here with more HTML elements. It just happens to be the case here that we have a pretty simple one. But with that added, if you now save this, the users are back and they got the same style as before, which is now coming from that wrapping card component though. And ng-content therefore is another crucial Angular feature which can help you build more powerful and flexible components. And we can therefore now also use this card component here as a wrapper in the task component and wrap this article with app card like this. And of course then import this card component into the task component so that it is available there as well. And with that, you'll see that now these tasks also have that look with the rounded corners and this slight drop shadow. Another pretty important feature offered by Angular is the feature of pipes, which in the end are output transformers, you could say. Things that transform output in templates. And a good example for such a pipe can be seen in the task component HTML file. Because here we of course have this date, this due date, which we're outputting. At the moment it looks like this, which is not horrible, but maybe also not the most human readable way. To output this in a nicer way, we can funnel this value through a pipe by using this pipe symbol, this vertical bar here, after task due date. And then after this pipe symbol, we add one of the pipes defined by Angular. So one of the pipes built into Angular. And you can also build your own pipes, and we'll do that later in the course, but for now we'll use a built-in one. And the built-in pipe I want to use is the date pipe, which, as the name suggests, is a transformer that's provided by Angular that aims to format dates in a more human-readable way. Now, this date pipe currently is unknown, and at least at the point of time where I'm recording this, I also don't get such a import suggestion, but that's of course no problem. We can import it manually in the task component by importing the date pipe, written like this, from @Angular common. So not from core, but from common. And then we add the date pipe next to the card component here in the imports array. With that, it's unlocked and it will now transform this date. As you can see if you save this, now this is formatted in a more human-readable way. Now this date pipe also can be configured so that you can control how the date should be formatted. And you find more information in the official documentation. There you also find a more detailed description and also detailed usage notes. Because in the end, those Angular pipes can be configured by adding a colon after the pipe name, and then thereafter any parameters, any configuration that should be passed to the pipe. For example here, we could pass the string short to the date pipe so that we get this formatting style here. So if we save this, we now would have this short formatting look here. Now in my case, that's actually not what I want. Instead, I want this full date formatting, and therefore I'll use full date as an option here. And with that, I get this output, which in my opinion looks better. And that's the concept of working with pipes.